So welcome everyone to our third Zoom session for the Staycation KAL. I am delighted to see everybody's projects and to know how people are getting along. And today, what we're going to do is we'll talk a little bit about color on the shawls. And then the other thing I'm going to do is do some demonstration of shawl blocking, as I've had a lot of requests for that. And I have knit a couple of teeny tiny little shawls that we will actually block in the course of the Zoom so that you can see one way that I like to handle blocking a shawl like this. So during the course of this evening, we're going to give away a couple of gift certificates again, and you must be here in order to win the gift certificates. Unfortunately, there's no way for us to keep track of everybody should you have to leave. So we will be giving away two $50 gift certificates, and it will be by random draw. So everybody has an equal chance to win. So, Staycation KAL colors. I just wanted to talk a little bit about those because I've been seeing a lot of people posting some really gorgeous shawls, but some of them are really nervous that they might have done something naughty by having chosen colors that weren't in the original. And I do want to assure everybody that I am actually, as a designer, excited to see that, because you can kind of take a kit as a suggestion, but it's certainly not a graven in stone thing. So when you do decide to change the colors up in a shawl like this, the only thing that you'll need to consider is contrast between colors. This one is actually a fun one because you can make that main color a speckle color, so it doesn't have to be a semi-solid. We chose to use a semi-solid because we were interested in having a nice, rich, slightly tone-on-tone gray shawl this time. Okay, I wasn't sure about it, and Heather gets total credit for having chosen the gray, just so that you all know that. Anyway, you can use a softly speckled yarn for that, and the texture in this shawl is robust enough that you would still be able to see the pattern, and the same thing with the tulip section. So if you do decide to do another shawl or change your colors up for any reason, there's no reason why you have to stick to the original ones. The only thing that you'll want to do is make sure that you have some contrast between your mini skeins and your background color, and that you kind of follow the pattern that's in there in terms of you need a darker mini skein, you need a lighter mini skein, and sort of some in the middle there. And that's because of that very last section of slip stitch. You want to have the colors showing up nicely there. But like I say, fly, be free. You have the designer's permission to change anything that you want, and that also includes the stitch patterns. So for the people who are anxious because they might have changed something on there, I applaud you, because I will tell you now, I never knit the same thing twice. And so if I'm using somebody else's pattern, I can guarantee you I'm changing something there anyway. It's just part of the creativity of knitting. And so I definitely welcome people who are doing that. So we've seen a lot of people who are saying, you know, the tulips really aren't necessarily for me. And like I say, the texture stitch in place of that, or maybe one of the slip stitches, would be a lot of fun. And you don't have to do the big tulips if they're just not your thing. The only thing, again, that I'll mention is that if you're going to replace with, say, colored slip stitches or more bands of stripes or something like that, just make sure that you add in a little bit of additional mini skein color just to make sure you don't run out. You could also add more than 5 colors to this shawl, and it's absolutely perfect for that sort of thing. So put as many stripes in as you want. Just remember that the texture pattern itself is done in sets of 4 rows. So if you're going to put some stripes in where they're not planned, just think about the math a little bit and you'll have no trouble in adding those stripes. You can also stripe the background stitch itself, which I think could be really cute. And I believe I saw someone do that and was quite impressed by the color. Another little tip that you could do with this pattern would be is if you really like that background stitch, just knit the whole shawl with that shaping in that background stitch. Then you'd have this lovely waffle weave shawl, and you could put the lace on the edge to give it a little bit of a pop of color there. So lots and lots of things that you can do this one to change it up if you're looking for something super mellow and nice. Alrighty, so having talked about the color choices, I think, given that we have a reasonable number of participants, that Heather, we could do our first draw.
Okay, our first winner is Fran Galbraith.
Congratulations, Fran Galbraith. So what we're going to do is have you email our wonderful customer service person, Wendy, and she will set you up with your gift certificate. Wendy's email is sales@ancientartsfiber.com, and she will pop that, or Heather will, into the chat for you. And all you got to do is email and let her know that it's you. So congratulations, Fran. Now, before I dive into the wonderful world of blocking, Does anyone have any questions about playing with colors in this shawl? Feel free to unmute and ask. Alrighty, so we have no questions right now. Oh, wait, I think Wendy's waving her hand.
Well, it's not a question, but I have seen a few that have used a completely different background color. One of them is Beth, and she used a bright red, and it is just a beautiful, beautiful shawl. We got another gal in the knit along who used golden retriever and picked different colors.
So yeah, I've been really
really
enjoying seeing it.
Yeah, it's really fun to see those knitters that stepped right outside the neutral palette and picked something nice and bright and wonderful.
I've seen a very vivid blue somewhere too. I don't remember which platform it was on. And then of course there's a beautiful pink shawl. I know there's at least one post on Instagram with the pink shawl. And so yeah, playing with the color is actually a lot of fun. And something like this, it's just such a perfect canvas to start painting with your own colors. So great observation, Wendy. And if you haven't seen them, definitely pop in on social media and have a look at them. So quite a few of them are being posted in our Facebook group, and you can join the group there. And there's a lot of people that chat there, a lot of helpful people posting there, answering questions and so on. And then, like I say, lots of inspiration for color. That's actually where I got the idea that maybe I should say, you know, it's totally okay to try a speckle color, because somebody was a little concerned that they had chosen that. And I was like, no, it's great. Absolutely fantastic. Okay, so now blocking the shawl. Not everyone is going to be done your shawl. And remember that you can post a picture of your shawl somewhere, anywhere, and that's going to make you eligible for the grand prize for the KAL, and that is a sweater kit. So any social media platform, if it's on Instagram, make sure to tag us. You can post in our Facebook group, on our Ravelry thread. And if you don't have access to the Facebook group and don't want to join it, feel free to pop it in as a comment on one of the Staycation Shawl posts. So we've had lots of people do that, and we've had somebody win on there before. So it's give you just as many opportunities as we possibly can. Anyway, once you get to the end of the shawl, obviously you have to block it. And one of the things that I've had a lot of feedback from people on is wanting some information about blocking shawls, because this is an endlessly complex thing. And how do you block a shawl that's got texture, and what kind of method might you want to use? So I have knit two cute little mini shawls with some leftover yarn. This isn't left over from the actual Staycation shawl. I had taken some pink home. I don't remember what I did with it, but Indy, the 6-month-old kitten of doom, had destroyed the ball of yarn. So I used that to knit my tiny shawls. So I'm going to spotlight this for everybody. And then we're actually going to block these teeny little shawls so that you'll be able to have a look at that. So one teeny little shawl uses the texture stitch, and I even put a lace border on here because this way we can block the lace at the same time as the main body. And then we have another shawl here, and you'll notice that I just ended it with some garter stitch. So if you're a person who is not a fan of lace and don't want to do it, then you could just end it with garter stitch. And the nice thing about the texture stitch itself is that it's not prone to buckling or warping. So a couple of rows of garter were enough to simply end the shawl off. So we're going to try blocking these in two different ways. Now, the first way that we're going to do with this one is we're going to wet block this one. So what's the difference between wet blocking and not wet blocking? Well, it's really basically the amount of water that gets involved in the blocking process. So when I'm doing a lace shawl or something where I really want to spread out something like yarn overs, say in our tulip section, I will wet block my shawl. Wet blocking also will hide a multitude of tension sins. So if you have a big section of knitting where you've got some wonky stitches and so on, when the yarn is wet, it's able to slide around a little bit better and even out. So wet blocking is great for making lace show, and it's great for evening out tension. And then if you were doing a lot of knitting, and, you know, I remember when I had my dog, he used to like to come and stick his head on my knitting while I was doing it, and I would get a lot of dog slobber on it. So it would give me a chance to wash it. So I actually have a little bowl of water here, and I have some water in it, and we're going to stick this in here, and we're going to squish it up and get it all ready to be rolled in a damp towel. When I go to block a shawl with hand-dyed yarn that has some color to it, I will always put a little bit of acid in my water, because a lot of water, particularly Alberta water and Saskatchewan water, can be very alkali. Pardon me, and that can cause the color in your hand-dyed yarn to want to leave the yarn. So all hand-dyed yarn is done with weak acid dyes, and weak acid dyes bind in the presence of acid. So if it goes into alkali water, then that's going to start breaking the bonds with the dye, and this is where you're going to get bleed, and it can be any color that it happens with. But of course, as we all know, red is much more likely to be our evil candidate. We do have somebody who blocked a shawl with this green, and it has never, ever, ever, in all of the years that I've been dyeing, had an issue with bleeding. And of course, what happens? One of our staff had it bleed on her shawl. So adding a bit of vinegar or lemon juice or citric acid is a really great way to stop that. And it also helps to keep your colors bright. Now, if you are washing yarn that's superwash in a washing machine, there's two things about that. One is you can add some acid to your wash water. Just dump a cup of vinegar into the washing machine before it runs. And two, try to avoid detergent when you're washing it. So if you use a soap-based cleaner like Woolite, then it's going to be a lot better for the color because detergent will strip color from yarn. So those are a couple of little things that you can use to help you keep the color nice and bright for lots of years to come on your shawl. So I have put a little bit of citric acid in my water here and then a wee dab of soap. The wee dab of soap helps the shawl to pick the water up faster and evener. And if you had a lot of dog slobber in your shawls, the way I used to before my dog went to that great park in the sky, then that will help to clean it. You don't need a lot of anything fancy, and dish soap does just fine for washing yarn, especially wool yarns, because it's gentle. So we plop our shawl into our water. And hand-dyed yarn, too, does not need to soak for a long time. So I'm going to move this underneath the camera so you can see how fast this is picking up the water. There's this prevalent wisdom out there that I see quite often saying that you need to soak your shawls overnight or for a long period of time. But this has been less than 30 seconds and it's now completely wet. So why is that? So what's happening is that when you need to soak something for a long period of time in order to block it, it's usually a commercial yarn and it's got some sort of coating on it. So when there's a coating on it, then that means it's harder for the water to penetrate it, so it needs more time. A hand-dyed yarn has been completely cleaned and has no coating, so it can pick the water up right away. So this is really long enough to soak it. It's not going to cause any issues if you want to leave it longer, but it doesn't need to be in there any longer either. So then what I do is I just give it a gentle squeeze. Whoa. Obviously, I did not stir my water, so my citric acid did not dissolve. Whoops. Guess that shows that my dye was not minded to come out. Anyway, you can see that with that bit of acid in the water is completely clear here, so no bleeding from a pink that you would think might be in danger of it, and from the green that we know was a rascal on one shawl already. So that is a tip that to me is worth gold, and you can use this with commercial yarns too, because some of them will have a similar dye. The next step with your poor little drowned rat of a shawl is I like to take a towel and just lay the towel out, and then I'm going to roll my shawl up in it briefly. And that's going to help squeeze out excess water. Don't do too much squeezing on it because you'll, like start to ruffle those fibers around. And if it's a nice dainty merino, you might be ending up damaging your yarn. So just a little squeezing and that's good enough. So now our shawl is nice and wet. It's had a chance to relax, and look at how much this has grown already. I'm going to take this towel away and I'm going to put the other little shawl by it. And these are exactly the same size, and you can see that it's grown. And the reason it grew is that the yarn was able to relax once it got wet. Now we have a decision to make, which is, do we want to hard block it? Hard blocking a shawl is when you pull it out as tight as you can. And the pulling it out tight as you can is going to allow all of the yarn overs and stitch patterns to show really well. If you've got a little bit of uneven tension, it's also going to help with that. And the easiest way to do the hard blocking is to use blocking wires. So this is a set of blocking wires that are short. These are made by Tulip, but there's lots and lots of companies that make blocking wires. And blocking wires are just a nice piece of stiff wire that's a little bit bendy, and you can run it in the shawl to keep an edge straight, or to keep a border straight. And sometimes I'll use these right in the middle of my shawl if I have a section where I want to make sure that it stays straight. So a perfect example was my oak leaf and acorn shawl. That has a section of lace in between rows of garter stitch. And the lace can sometimes cause the garter stitch to be all wonky. So running a blocking wire across the top and bottom of the lace section meant that it stayed nice and straight, and I didn't end up with my garter stitch going higgledy-piggledy. When I'm putting it in the edges of the shawl, what I tend to do is go about two garter rows in between each dip up and down through there. You want to move it in one stitch from the edge because the slip stitch is loose, and you don't really want that poor slip stitch to get pulled out. So I go in a stitch or two, and then about 2 garter bumps between each insertion of the needle, and it's just zigzag back onto this. So you can see what I'm doing there. Yes, sort of, kind of. Hopefully it's showing better on your screen than it is on mine. So what we do is we take that wire and we feed it through, and this is going to allow us to keep the shawl edge nice and straight. I usually put my wires in before I start pinning the wires out, because then you don't have the issue of trying to maneuver around where the shawl is already pinned down. So I'm going to put in a blocking wire along the other edge here. And again, stay away from that slip stitch edge because you will get a nicer, tidier, straighter edge if you move in a row or two. And you don't want to end up with the slip stitch pulling out and making nasty wonky loops, because if you're me, that will drive you nuts. Now, if you should happen to block a shawl and it goes wonky, you can always just reblock it. It's not graven in stone, and every single time that you wash the shawl, you'll have to pin it back out again. Sometimes too, what can happen is that you will wash your shawl, or you'll wear your shawl a long time, and the blocking will be lost. So we actually have one here that I knit a number of years ago that I'm going to reblock because it's been on display and it has not had a blocking in a number of years, and the lace is starting to collapse in on itself just a wee bit. So whenever that happens, you can just reblock. And along the top border, I move in just 1 stitch beyond that nice little green there, because I don't want to end up compressing it, and I'm going right in between where it joined on. It's hard to see through my hands, but again, just skipping a couple of stitches there. Now you can spread the shawl wider sections on the blocking wire if you want, but I like to go fairly close because then I don't end up with a bunch of little divots in the shawl later on. So now we have our blocking wires inserted in our shawl, and we're going to pin it out, and I like to use foam squares. I am greatly amused by this one because my 6-month-old kitten Indy has decided these are extremely fun toys to play with, and he has destroyed all of my squares, so they now all have this lovely pattern of some sort of abstract art a la Indy, but it'll still work for today. I'm going to have to replace them. So what I do when I'm putting my shawl on the blocking wire, with its blocking wires in there on the mat, is I'll line up a straight edge on the edge of my mat, and then I'm going to take a few T-pins. And I sometimes get asked, what is a T-pin? And this is a T-pin here. They're really nice because they don't rust, so they're stainless steel coated, and they're also really thick and strong and have a nice broad head on them. All the better for 6-month-old kittens to grab them and run away with, but they're also much easier to put into whatever you're pinning your shawl down onto. So I like to go along the edge, and some blocking mats actually have measurements on them, which is really helpful because then it makes it even easier to keep it straight. But I just go to the edge of the mat, and then I'm going to pin this down. And what this is going to do is I'm putting it right by the wire here, by the way. So what it's going to do is allow you to pull the other wire tight without this one flopping all over. So now when I want to stretch my shawl out, what I'll do is I'll take the other wire and I just pull on it, and you see how it pulls the whole shawl out. So blocking wires are a very fine thing because they make it easy. You do have to avoid something like you see here. You see how this one isn't straight here? So that means this isn't actually evenly pulled out. So get your edges that would be straight, pinned first, and then do the final edge. So here I'm just going to put pins down that the blocking wire will bump up against, and I don't have to put very many pins in. So even on the full-size shawl, you don't need many. And now you can take this final wire, and then you can put a couple of pins in there, and we are all good. Shawls can surprise you. Anything can surprise you when you go to block it. So now that's being blocked, and see our original little shawl size on there? Quite a difference. Wet blocking like this is going to change how the texture stitch is going to look later on. It's going to be less waffly and squishy, and it's going to lie a little bit flatter and smoother. You'll still see your stitches really nicely, but it's not going to be as distinctly bumpy up and down as it would with another blocking method. By the way, people who are going, oh my goodness, what's up with those stitches on that waffle weave there? I could not find the right size needles for the shawl. They were in some other project already. And so I just literally grabbed a different set of needles and they were too big for this. So don't let that freak you out. It's loose, but it's not what your shawls will look like. Anyway, now we have the top on the wire. And this is another one that's really great for lace, because what we can do at this point in time is just grab each point of the lace. And I'm going to add another blocking mat here so I can do that. Not quite as badly chewed by a certain indie cat. He has much to answer for, though. And let's get this back here. And now what we can do is just take one T-pin and put it in the point of the lace and pull that nice and snug. And so what this is going to do is have the points of your lace look really nice. Your lace will be very distinct when it's dry. It'll show well. So that's the joys of using a wire, in that it makes the whole process so much easier. Now we're going to block the other mini shawl a little bit differently, so that I can show you a different type of blocking. So we have here our little mini shawl, and it is all stretched out, and you can see how quick and easy that was. So blocking wires are a wonderful thing. What happens if you don't have any blocking wires? Well, there's a couple of other tools that you can use. So I'm just going to get this other little shawl going here. Move along, shawl on blocking wires. Let go. Okay. So this is a type of tool that's really kind of nice, because these are sets of pins. So you can buy these either in the pretty rainbow colors that I have here, or some of my other sets are just plain white, but they're really nice because you can pin a section of your item, well, regardless of what it is, easily at one time. Or you can just use pins. Now, if you're using pins and you're pinning out a shawl, how far apart do you space them? Well, I find that I like to space them fairly close when I'm just using T-pins. So I usually put them about every ½ inch or so. And it depends on what you're blocking, but if you do that, then you don't get any little zigzags along the borders of what you're blocking. And you'll notice that I'm putting this on the blocking mat, and I have not done anything like wet it down yet. So what I'm going to do here is I am going to mist this. So we're not going to hard block this one the way we did the other one. What we're going to do is use a little mister. And we have here a misting bottle, if we can show it. There we are. And what we're going to do is pin the shawl out. You can either mist it before or after, and that's going to help it relax a little bit, but it's going to keep more of the front to back texture, if that makes sense. It'll be a little bit more waffle weavy. So I'm going to put my pins on here, and I'm just going to use these guys because I like these guys. These things, by the way, are just glorious, because you see how I just stick it into the edge of the shawl and then just pull it into line. So they really do speed things up nicely as well. But you can see along the top, there's a little bit of zigzaggy stuff going on. If that happens to you, just add another couple of T-pins and that will help. This little bit of zigzagging happening with the pins, you'll never notice later on. Oh, actually, this is kind of fun because this shawl is taken on a curve here, and I could pull it all the way out, or I could leave it. So let's just leave that. What the heck? I'm still going to put blocking pins in because I'm going to mist this shawl. This is like letting it have a little bit of a curve here. And when you mist it, it's going to relax a bit. And then when it dries, it'll tighten up. So what we're going to do is just make sure that it stays put. And then we're just going to mist it. So what that does is it allows the shawl to relax a little bit more. It allows the stitches to even out. And like I say, you can do it either before or after you pin it down. The misting will keep more of the texture, but it's not going to do quite as much to open up your yarn overs and your lace. And of course, it's not going to wash it. So if this was the one that my dog had drooled on, it wouldn't be quite as effective in cleaning out of his drool. So misting is very good for keeping the texture. It works well. And if you have a piece that's really dense, so if you were working with something like an Aran weight yarn, then you could mist both sides of it and pin it down. And like I say, you can do it before or after. This case, you notice I ran my fingers over it a little bit, and that just helps the yarn to move around. Now, if you want to know what that would be like if we just straighten this edge, you can see that it's a little less distinct in terms of the stitches here because that little bit of misting has given it just that little ability to move around. That can be helpful, but it's not sodden and flopping all over the place. So this will retain our texture a little more. This is very much, in some ways, a personal decision as to what you prefer for blocking. And it's very much based on what is it that you're blocking. So heavy lace or lace, you know, a piece that has a lot of it in there, I like to wet block it because I will block the living daylights out of that lace and then it shows really well. If it's something that has a lot of texture stitches in there, then I'll probably just mist it because it doesn't need to be pulled so hard. And I'll keep some of that squish factor that I'm going to lose to wet blocking. So it's not like you can't reblock these, but hard blocking will take away a little bit of the waffly feeling to it, but it'll open everything out really well at the same time. So again, what is it that you're blocking and what is your end goal? So with this tiny shawl later on, it's going to have a little bit more of the texture stitch still being textury. If I had the large tulips here, then it wouldn't open out the yarn overs as well as that hard blocking with the wet blocking would. But I also retain the squishiness of this. If I was making a blanket with this stitch, and somebody suggested today that they would like to do that, and I thought, oh yes, wouldn't that be glorious? I would just mist it in that case because then I would keep so much of the squish value of the stitch. So I'm going to show you two other pieces that I have blocked, and they are different projects. Just got to grab them because I left them here. So this is one that I was showing people in a class recently, and this is a lace. And there's a lot of yarn overs in this lace. And so this has been hard blocked. So I have wet this down and pulled it out as tight as it wanted to go. And you notice how my yarn overs are showing really well. This is a yarn that's very, very round. It has lots of plies and it really doesn't want to show lace as well as it might. So soaking it and then putting it on the blocking mats with wires really help to open out those lace holes. And then this shawl here has some simple lace in it. And you can still see the yarn overs, but I didn't want to block this one too terribly hard because if I did, I would lose the scoosh of my garter ridges in here. This is an Aran weight yarn and it's very light and airy. So if I blocked the living daylights out of it, I would lose a lot of the character there. So I blocked it a little softer and a little more gently. And that gave me a nice ability to see the lace, but it didn't destroy the texture here either. Because if you pulled this out a lot harder, you can see how you start to lose the garter ridges there. They're there, but they're not that nice squish that they would have had with a little bit of a softer blocking. So are there any questions on that? Do feel free to ask anything that you would like. No questions?
I have a question, Caroline.
Yes.
Do you mix anything in the water that's in the spray bottle when you're doing the misting?
If I was going to be doing something that was like a super saturated red, I might actually put a little bit of acid in there, especially depending on what you're laying it down on top of, because reds, it does not matter how carefully one sets them. They're so sensitive to the water in Alberta here that I would put a little acid in there. And acid can be vinegar, it can be lemon juice, it can be citric acid, just something to make sure that you're not putting that alkali water on there and causing the dye bonds to break. I will say that many years ago, I did actually have that happen with a commercial red, and I forgot about it. I misted it. I put it down on a white sheet on top of my bed, and then I had a beautiful red lace pattern on it later on. So yeah, that was a great question. Definitely adding a little bit of acid on something like that would be a good idea.
And would you add any kind of Dawn or anything like that?
No, with misting, one of the goals is just to lightly wet it. And so it really doesn't need anything added to it to make it penetrate. What you'll find too is like, you saw how fast that Socknado yarn there soaked up the water. It's a little bit fluffy, and so it opens out easily and the water can get in there. If it's something like, say, a silk yarn or a yarn with a large proportion of silk, I mean, even 25% is enough to do it. That's when having a little bit of something soapy in there to help that water penetrate can really make a difference. And if you happen to own something like Synthropol, which is just simply a soap that doesn't do a lot of foaming, that can help too. And it's just like a dab of it, just a tiny bit, and that will help a lot with getting that thing wetted. Like I say with the hand-dyed stuff too, don't leave it soaking for a long time. And I forgot something else, which is you don't need to use warm water. So hand-dyed yarns don't have coatings on them. They will happily get wet in cold water, and that helps to preserve dye bonds as well. So if you get water over 140 degrees Fahrenheit, that's going to start breaking dye bonds as well, because this particular type of dye bonds with acid and heat. So if you recreate the conditions where the dye was loose, then you will loosen the dye, which is really kind of frustrating, I know. But like I say, it's a trick I've been using for decades. It was actually something my mother taught me, and I was probably about 10 or 12 years old. She said, always put lemon juice in your water with your shawls and your knitting. And I never knew why when I was younger, but she was a prairie girl and learned to knit in Saskatchewan and did a lot of knitting for money. So she had to do a lot of blocking, and she must have found out the prairie water was a problem. So do we have any other questions?
I do, Caroline. Would there ever be an instance when you're doing a shawl that has, like that gray one, squishy garter and lace, where you could use both techniques?
That is such a great question. And yes, so this is where your blocking wires can be really handy, because I've had at times, and again, like oak leaf and acorn is a perfect example, sections where there's this really fine lace and a big panel of it, and then the garter stitch, which is so yummy. So if you put the blocking wires in there, you can pull everything between the blocking wires nice and tight, but leave the garter stitch on each side of it less pulled tight. So that was a great question. I definitely use that. And like I say, blocking wires are a bit of an investment, but they are so handy. And like I say, if you don't have a lot of space or anything, blocking pins, world's best invention. Karin, I see you have a hand up.
Do you recommend that we weave our ends in before or after we block?
Ooh, that's a great question too. So I have been playing with this for a number of years now because I was curious myself, and I have to do everything by testing it. So usually I like to weave my ends in and then block it. And there's a reason why. If you weave your ends in, snip them off, and then you block things, you notice how it pulls out? So what happens quite often is that the ends of your woven in bits, they pop out. And so now you've got all these popped ends again, and you've got to go back and you've got to like snip them down a little bit more and try to deal with them. And sometimes in some cases, even weave them back in if it was a short end. So long story short, I have taken to doing it now before I block, and I don't cut the end off until the item is completely dry, because then I can cut it off and it's not going to pop back out. There's also a Patty Lyons trick that I absolutely love. And I'd been kind of sort of doing this before she mentioned it, but she put it into such a perfect set of words. So she said, cut the ends, leave a little bit sticking out, and then take like a pin, and I use my little embroidery scissors, and just fray that end out and spread it out. And she said, then it won't pop out again. And I'm like, whoa, I never thought of doing that with superwash, but let's see what happens. And you know what? Gosh darn it, she's right. So that's the other thing, is that cut them after you've blocked, and then leave a little bit. So if you're in metric, then I would leave about 4 millimeters. If you're in inches, I would leave a little less than 1/4 of an inch. And then you can fray that little bit out. You'll never see it later on, but it does keep those ends from popping so much, because sometimes they'll just be like pop, 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 driving you nuts. So yeah, definitely a great question. And I think probably it's been about 8 years now that I've been alternating my blocking to see what happened, and I much prefer to do it beforehand. So do we have any other questions? Lorraine, I see your hand up.
Hello. I'm wondering if somebody can just show me the front and the back of their shawl, because I've just started Italian garden and I've done 3 rows, and I see it's not a part of the pattern where I can watch television. So I only got 3 rows done last night. But I wanted to see the front and the back because I haven't knit like that before. So I was having I kept thinking, aren't you going to run out of your main color because you're never adding color, because you keep just slipping the stitches, and I couldn't picture it. That's why. And I think it was Karen who sent me a little photo of hers on my phone, but I'd like to see the whole shawl, just that section, in the front
That is
and the
a
back.
great question. And so I've spotlighted Wendy, who is holding one here. So Wendy, if you want to unmute and tell us what side you're showing us.
Oops. So this is the front side. And then this is the back side.
So on the back, you're going to see the ridges where you're switching from garter to stocking stitch, and that's totally normal. And the other thing you're going to see is where you have carried those floats. So where you've slipped the stitches. So you'll get lines of yarn behind them.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. That's helpful. Thank
It's
you.
going to look, before it's blocked, it's going to look like super messy, and you'll think to yourself, oh my Lord. The other thing about that is that you notice how the floats are nice and straight, and that's after it's blocked. Before it's blocked, make the floats be like a little tiny smiley face in your work, and then you're going to have enough slack for those to be able to pull out if you decide to hard block it. And I will say this one has been hard blocked, and that makes everything lie nice and flat and straight. So that was another great question. And that's one of the joys of being able to have the Zooms, is that we can do that sort of thing. We can share these. So I'm noticing that we're almost 3/4 of the way through this Zoom. So Heather, would you like to draw the next gift certificate? So this is for a $50 gift certificate, and good for anything in the online shop. You can also use it in person if you happen to be here.
The next winner is Doreen Slater.
Congratulations, Doreen. I've got to admit, I absolutely love us doing these things because I just like giving things away. It makes me very happy. So that's the last of the gift certificates for the Zoom. But remember that we will still be doing a KAL draw for a grand prize of a sweater kit. And you will definitely want to enter for that, because if you're not a sweater knitter, you can always say, could I just have a gift certificate for that value? And we will definitely do that for you. So that will be drawn on Tuesday, and we'll announce it on social media, and I'll make sure that it's posted everywhere so that we all know who won. Now, I see a comment about weaving in ends. Some tips for weaving in the ends. Oh, yes, 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 yes. Okay, on my mini shawls, I wove in no ends. Goodness gracious, there it is. So let's pull this little soggy mini shawl apart here. There's a million different ways to weave in ends, but there is a way that my mother showed me to do it, which is very old, and I never see anybody using this, and I really like it. So I thought it would be kind of fun to show you guys. So there's various different ways to weave in ends. You can do duplicate stitch. You can weave it in at an angle. Where's my little camera thing here? Let's spotlight you. So you can weave them in at an angle diagonally. The biggest tip that I can say when we're weaving in ends is that if you run it only in one direction, it has the ability to start popping out. But if you can run it part that way and then back the other way, then you get that angle turn, which will help it to not come out. And what does that mean? Well, I'll show you. So the other thing that's about weaving in ends, one of the ways that I was shown to weave in ends by me mother a disturbingly long time ago now, and this is something that comes down from my grandmother, and I had the horrible realization that, my God, I am not getting any younger, because my grandmother was born in somewhere like 1880. So this is a really old method of weaving in ends for knitting. But instead of doing something complicated and challenging, what we do in my family is we just come along and we're going to follow a horizontal row in the knitting. So what I'm going to do is just go under, and let's get this up close so you can see this better, and around each of the purl bumps on the back side. And then I'm going to gently pull my yarn through, give it a little tug so that it has the ability to be elastic still. And then I'm going to go on the same row, and I'm going to repeat this, guys. I'm just going to go on the same row on the other side and catch the purl bumps. And you notice that it's not very visible at all. So it's really hard to see. And this one almost never comes out. So it's a really nice way to weave in ends. It's really fast, and you don't have to worry about all this angled nonsense. So what I meant about it's harder to get it to fall out is, you see how it went this way and then it turned and went back the other way. This angled turn here is going to help keep that in place. So it's not going to get pulled out if the shawl gets really yanked. So I can give it a great big yank and it can't just pull the whole end out. And it lasts a really nice long time that way. Now this is left out. I'm not going to cut that off until I'm finished blocking theoretically, but let's do it right now. Let's see if I can find some scissors here. These have been floating around here all week long, being convenient. And now, of course, I can't find them. Other scissors, ha ha ha. So we have our end, it's flopping around. I'm going to cut it off, and I'm going to leave a little bit sticking out. So you see how we have a little bit sticking out here? So we're going to leave that, but what we're going to do, in my case, I'm going to use my scissors, is we're just going to fray that out. Going to make it a little ploofy, floofy thing. You can do it with your fingers too, so you can scratch at it. And this little bit of fuzz there, later on, you're going to have a hard time seeing it because it's going to mat down onto the shawl, but that's what helps to keep those ends from popping. So let's weave in this other end. Where did I put my needle? Right in front of me. So the goal, of course, with weaving in ends is to make sure that they don't come out again, but the other goal is to hide them. So here on the tip, we have some garter stitch. And what I'm actually going to do is weave my yarn through my garter stitch. And again, I'm going to go through those bumps. Make sure to give it a little tug. And then because the row's not very long, I'm actually going to go over to the next row, and I can go up the side. You'll never see this later. And I'm going to do the same thing where I catch the purl bumps and run the yarn through them. One doesn't have to do a ton of these in order to have it fully secured. It's the zigzagging thing that really helps to make sure that it never comes back out again. So again, it's really well hidden in the purl bumps on the wrong side. And what I'm going to do is cut my little end off here and fray it out. Normally, I wouldn't cut that little end off until I'm finished blocking, but this little guy is damp and he'll sit on my desk and become a cute little shawl whether I do this or not. So I'm using a curved tip scissor, but you can use a needle, you can use your thumbnail, you can use whatever you want. And I left this one quite long because when you rub it into the shawl itself, it's not going to show a lot. But if you don't like it, if you think there's too much of it floofing out, you can just come along and prune it down a bit. But you see what I mean about how that end is now basically invisible, you can't see it. So, some yarn. Let's grab this one. I'm going to take this big fat yarn and I'm going to weave it in this shawl just because it gives some contrast, because I know that some of our monitors will make it more difficult to see. So we have our wrong side, and what I do is I look for the purl bumps, and then I'm going to take the needle. Let's get this up nice and high so you can see it, and I'm just going to loop around them. So I loop around my purl bumps and then I pull my yarn through, and this is an Aran weight yarn on a socknado, so that's a little bit of a strain for the yarn, but you see how it lies wrapped around those purl bumps. But if it wasn't lacy and open here, you'll not see it on the other side because it's not coming through. So you can see the gray just a teeny tiny bit, but normally when you're weaving in the same color of yarn, so we did the other one here, can't see it at all. So no signs of that woven in yarn, even though it's right on the other side there. That's why I love this purl bump thing. Actually, I showed you the wrong side. Okay, you still can't see it. So then we turn around, we go back the other way, and this is the other side of that line of garter. And you can do this with stocking stitch as well as garter stitch. And we just go back the other direction, gently pulling this big fat yarn through there. Give it a little tug. Now, this one got kind of loose, so I can tighten that up again. If it gets a bit loose when you tug it, then just pull on the yarn that you've woven in. But this is now well held in there, and it's not going to come out. This will stay there for years. This would actually be a cute way to put an embellishment in, I just realized, and I'm like, oh my goodness, the design possibilities. But that's a nice, easy way to weave ends in. So does that make sense, or does somebody want me to pull the other shawl off and do some more end weaving? We're all good? All righty. So are there any other questions? And if not, would anybody like to share their shawl and show it off? And I'm just looking at the chat, and yeah, there's some really complicated ways of weaving in ends. I will also note, somebody said need to purchase a bent tip needle. They are really nice. You don't need to have them, but they are really nice. They just make it so much easier, especially if you use the method that I do for weaving in ends. And I've done this with anything and everything my whole life, because like I say, my mom taught me that when I think I was 4 years old, and Why change? I really don't like on some pieces too the method that has you weaving them in on a diagonal, because when you do that, then that is absolutely just a one-sided piece. This, even if it's the backside of a shawl and you have Stephen West and his 16 million colors and ends, it's nowhere near as obtrusive, so you don't see it much, which means your shawl stays a little bit more double-sided. So I do quite like it. Plus, it's really simple.
I think Doreen's got her shawl on. She's showing it off.
Ooh, excellent. All right, let me spotlight Doreen so we can all see this beauty. Oh, wow, Doreen, that is beautiful. Absolutely lovely. Look at those beautiful tulips. Wow.
It turned out really good, Doreen.
Mm-hmm. I love it.
Thank you so much. I also did the a smaller gauge than the pattern called for, and my leftovers are pretty small.
Yeah, I will admit that somebody might have been a little off her gauge near the end of the shawl, and somebody did not have a lot of pink left over. Naming no names looks an awful lot like me. So I was doing great until I did that little band, and I was watching something, probably Scandinavian noir. I remember being really excited by it and then looking later and going, oh, I don't think that quite matches, but don't tell anyone.
Well, and my friend asked why the tulips were upside down when I put my shawl on. So I'm thinking if I make it again, I'm going to have to turn the tulips around so when I wear the shawl, they're right side up.
Yeah, you know, it's funny because I remember debating about which way to put the tulips, because I was thinking, well, if you put them this way, they look like they're upside down, but how am I more likely to wear the shawl? And so that's actually the direction that I chose, was the fact that I'm more likely to throw the colored border over my shoulder. But it's a great idea if you wear it differently to just flip those little puppies. The only thing is to watch out, because you want to make sure that you don't have them run off the side where it's narrower. So you might want to just do a little bit of checking to make sure they fit, is what I'm trying to say. And if they don't quite fit, just drop one. So does anyone else want to share their shawl? I see a hand up for Gail. Oops. I don't know if you meant to. Yeah, Instagram does this, and then it's like, oh, I'm going to put your hand up for you, whether you want it or not. I do see Kim with her hand up. So Kim Pelk.
I'm still working on the after the second color part. So
Well, that's coming along beautifully. That is really lovely.
thank you.
Yeah, it looks really good, Kim.
Mm-hmm. Your lace is so perfect. It's always exciting as the designer to be able to see these, because it's like, oh, look at that. They made it better than me. So
Caroline,
pretty.
You
Yes.
wanted me to show off the bauble-less tulips.
Ah, yes. So again, permission for everybody who is not a bauble person to leave the baubles off. Is that the right side or wrong side, Wendy? I can't quite tell. It's getting really close to the camera.
Oh, sorry. No, that is the right side.
Good. Okay. Yeah, that's a little easier. So they do look really cute without the baubles. And then, of course, we've had a few people who have talked about adding beads and buttons and embroideries. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what some of them do, because it's just so fun to be creative with something like that. Is there anyone else who would like to share their shawl?
Can I nominate Gail? Because I think she's the young lady that did the one with the golden retriever as the background. No, different Gail. Sorry.
Well, that's okay. We don't have to share any more shawls, because not all of us are set up for doing that. Sorry, I was just watching somebody who I thought was going to unmute. Anyway, we're getting near the end of our time. So I just wanted to give you another chance to ask any questions that you might have at all. Anybody have any other further questions? Yeah, Karen, I know what you mean, not block, but you know what? I've seen a picture of your not block shawl and it's super pretty. Okay, so I'm just going to go back through the chat and see if there's anything here that I need to answer still.
I have a question.
Yes.
Hi. Sorry, I'm not close to do a chat. My question is, how do you best change colors? Go into another color.
So would it be in this particular
Our
shawl or
yarn.
in general?
In this
Sorry?
particular shawl. In
Okay.
this particular shawl.
In this particular shawl, you can carry the colors up the side for the most part. So what happens when you're carrying colors is that you would knit with the color. So for example, in the mosaic, so you're going to knit your 2 rows with your background color, for example, and then you're going to switch to the other color. What you can do is just join it in. You can either do the evil thing of tying it in, you could weave the end in to begin, or you can do what I do, which is just start knitting with it and deal with the end later. And you're going to knit your 2 rows. Then you get back to your original color where you want to change colors. All of this has to happen on the back of the work. So if you're slipping the first stitch with the yarn in front, and then you're going to change the color, what you want to do is slip that stitch and then move the yarn to the back of the work, and then pick up the new color from underneath the color that you just finished, and then start your work on the next row. And if you do that, it's like an intarsia join then. What'll happen is that the new yarn will then clamp the one that you just finished with onto the back and hide it. So it tucks it right up nicely against there. One other trick is to make sure that you don't yank that new yarn super tight and pull your edge in really tight. So you want to make sure you give it just a little tug so that it is normal tension.
I've been doing that, but my question is how do you actually change color? Because what I have been doing is tying on the new color. That's what I've been doing, but is there a better method to do that?
If you're going to keep on using the color over and over in a section, so like the Italian garden where you've got the mosaic, I wouldn't just keep cutting it. I would just tie it on once and then alternate the 2 through the section and then break the yarn at the end of it for the contrast color. If it's the little stripes of color, you kind of don't really have a choice because they're not going to get used again. So those ones you're going to have to tie on, knit your little eyelet stripe, and then break it off again. But you don't have to break the main color. You can just carry it up that edge again there. In general, the carrying of colors, there's sort of a little bit of a rule of thumb, and I was quite amused when I did Stephen West's Aurora Cabin to watch Stephen West totally break the rules, which is that normally you don't want to carry it kind of more than 4 rows up the side, but there is a sneaky way you can, which is that you just have to keep twisting the 2 colors together as you're going up. So if you want to knit 8 rows in gray and then reuse a contrast color, you'd have to twist the yarns each time you got back to the one side where you're carrying. And then again, that will kind of clamp it up against the back of the shawl. So that's what Stephen West did when he was alternating 5 colors in Aurora Cabin, is that you ended up with this mass of 5 colors getting twisted up the back side of the I-cord, and it actually tucked up pretty nicely if you do my little intarsia trick, so you hardly see them later on. The big problem with that is just making sure not to haul them all too tight or to make them too loose so that they were all floppy and messy. But it is kind of an interesting conundrum there, and it's a little bit of a personal choice in terms of what you're doing. So somebody has commented, Karen says, in the sections where we're carrying 2 colors, I put both of them in front to slip with yarn in front. You can definitely do that too. So there's no one right true way of carrying colors up the side. I tend to do it like an intarsia sort of thing on the back side, but that doesn't mean that that's right. There are no knitting police that I've ever seen, and I've been doing this for 54 years. And what Karen is suggesting in the chat will actually give you a different effect, and it can be really pretty. I noticed another person carrying yarn very differently when we did the KAL last year with Interweave, and that was the senior editor for Interweave Knits. Carrie Bogart was carrying her yarns the exact opposite way to me, up the edge, and what it actually did was give her a flecked edge up the side, and it was super pretty. So there is no one right true way. The best way to do it is to figure out what you like the effect of by maybe knit a swatch and carry some yarns there, see what that edge looks like, and then if you don't like doing it the one way, you can alter it. So there's not, like I say, there's not one complete answer to it. If you don't want them to show what I suggested will keep them as unobtrusive as possible. So let's pull this guy down. I can do it without throwing the mannequin to the ground. So where you're doing that little intarsia wrap on them, let's make sure we get the right edge there where I was carrying them. So when we go to the camera, you can't see them at all because they're tucked right up against the back of the work with that other color crossing over them. So they're hidden completely. But like I say, that's not necessarily always the right thing to do. It's just one way of doing it. Okay, where's the side that I was carrying these other ones? So this one, ooh, this is kind of fun because this not only has the carries, but it has my little floofy bits from weaving in my ends. So this one has the colors carried up the side because I carried the orange and the white there. And it also has the woven in ends in a couple of places too. And you can see one little ploofy thing there from weaving in an end. So they're not hugely noticeable when you use this method of mine. And I see one that I never frayed out on there, but again, that's where I've woven my ends in and they're fairly tidy and not too obtrusive. This gray one, I forgot to fray out. So he's showing. Naughty little thing. Alrighty, is there anything else that we can answer? We have just another minute or two. Alrighty, well, I want to thank everyone for participating in the KAL and for working on the shawls with us. This was just ever so much fun. This was like the best vacation, and I really appreciate all of you being along for it. We didn't go anywhere with it in one way, but we sure did in another way. And we have so many pretty shawls now to show for it. So that is something that is really touching to me. And I really appreciate the fact that you've all participated. So we have 4 more days, or is it 5? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 5 more days to post. You do not need to have finished in order to win the grand prize. So just make sure that you share it with us if you'd like to be entered in that grand prize draw. And what I'm going to do is every single post or picture that someone has posted counts as an entry, and then we'll do a random draw based on all of the posts. So thank you, everyone. I'm glad that you are learning things and getting tips and tricks, and we will definitely see you for the next KAL, I think, somewhere in November. Super secret, but you've heard it here. There is also, by the way, the Pom Pom magazine one, if you're interested in that one, for the pullover, and they have their cast-on / launch party for that on Saturday. It's free to attend. All you have to do is go to the Pom Pom magazine website and you can sign up and join them for that. And holy doodle, do they ever have a lot of prizes to give away in that too. So definitely worth attending. So we will be there, and we have contributed some prizes, and I'm really excited to see what they do with their launch. So thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening, and I will wish you all happy knitting.